9 U.S. Presidents Assassinated by Globalists by Larry Engel. This is Article 14 on the assassination in 1935 of presidential candidate, U.S. Senator, and Governor of Louisiana, Huey P. Long, who was called the Kingfish, after the famous Amos and Andy radio broadcast. The murder follows the classic pattern of a European black nobility Brotherhood of Death skull and bones operation. The target's own security personnel, medical doctors, and even family members are compromised, deceived, and coerced into playing a role in the murder plot. I use my observation, my intuition, and my opinion to write an article, and then I turn it into a video. Before I get to the assassination report that I'm going to have for you today, I want you to know that there is a serious effort to censor and prevent you from hearing this series of reports on the assassination of 9 U.S. presidents. They do not want the public to have this kind of information. There are 20 or maybe even more videos going to be in this series if it's not censored, but it may stop suddenly when they claim that I have infringed copyright laws, but I have not done so. There were several other infringement claims, but those claims were dropped because they realized that in a news report, as an investigative journalist, I'm permitted to use their materials to demonstrate and not to entertain you. And the case is that those claims were dropped because I didn't violate the copyright laws. This began when I reported it was unlawful for Jewish communities to join the Mossad in espionage and spying in the USA, and unlawful for other members of the Jewish community to not report it. This involves 30% of the Jews who become Mossad operatives, called Sayanim, and the remaining 70% who assist by concealing the activities. This, according to a Mossad source. I am falsely accused of copyright infringement. 3 entities identifying themselves only as WMG, SME, and InGrooves have made false claims without providing 1. Their full name, 2. if they are a corporation, 3. a contact person, 4. an address, 5. a telephone number, 6. the basis for their claim that they hold a copyright on items that should be in public domain for many years, and 7. any information whatsoever relative to their charge of infringement. These entities may be Warner's Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and something called InGroove that represents a number of recording companies. But we're talking about music that was created in 1930s. YouTube calls these unsupported claims strikes, and they will censor mine or any video series so you cannot see them. However, I have been investigating and reporting that it has been an act of sedition to remove music from public domain. The case, as an example, I am investigating and reporting to you in these news and educational reports is the 1930s era recordings of jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. Music plays a role in the culture of a nation, and by attacking and removing large segments of public domain music, it causes harm to the morale of the nation and makes it more difficult for people to resist the transfer of political and social institutions to an enemy aggressor. Sedition carries a death penalty when there is a conviction. We will need to see exactly what these copyright claims are based upon, and I am willing to defend my action if they wish to take me to court. The U.S. Supreme Court needs to review to determine if such claims are violations of protections originally guaranteed to the people and the culture of the nation by copyright law. This is called original intent. As a news broadcaster and educator, I am legally allowed to use copyrighted items in my news reports, when the purpose of the use is not to entertain. Please listen to a brief excerpt of music in reference to what's going on with the censorship of this video series. On to the report. The murder of Huey Long is the subject of a deathbed confession involving the New Orleans Mardi Gras Society, serving as a front and cover for Skull and Bones, and this group was called the Mystic Crew of Comus. Both President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover were secretly made kings of the Mystic Crew of Comus for their part in the Luciferian ritual murder of Senator Long, which is called the Killing of the King. The New World Order agenda of the globalists is a communist fascist police state to rule the world, and is directly opposed to and deadly enemy of all forms of representative government, of the people, for the people, and by the people, the deadly enemy of freedom and the deadly enemy of equality. The Hollywood movie Brother of the Bell, starring Glenn Ford and Dean Jagger, is a fictional story with fictional characters. However, it is a factual and true depiction of how the black nobility's secret societies employs its army of secret agents. Superiorly intelligent, extensively indoctrinated, highly trained middlemen infiltrate and take over any organization, government agency, or corporation. These operatives are manipulated into blind obedience by loans, by blackmail, by smear, by criminal frame-up, by certain death, if they oppose, and education and indoctrination, by career and financial reward also. English Jew Cecil Rhodesia Rhodes formed a cell of the Brotherhood of Death Skull and Bone Society called the Round Table. It trained specialists, Rhodes Scholars they were called, based upon the secret society's format of a central bank-directed Black Pope militant Jesuit society. Medical doctor Arthur Vidrine, a Rhodes Scholar of the Round Table, was ordered to kill U.S. Senator Huey Long. Famous lecturer David Icke stated, "The Round Table is the center of a network that includes the Royal Institute of International Affairs," that's in Britain, the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, the U.S.-based Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberger Group. The deathbed confession states that a cell of the Skull and Bones was created at the Tulane University School of Medicine in 1907 at New Orleans. Senator Huey Long would not have died of his gunshot wounds. Two surgical experts called to operate on Long were delayed and put out of commission by their driver, a Mason, who crashed their car on the way to surgery. This left Tulane, Oxford's Rhodes Scholar Arthur Vidrine alone to perform the operation, where he repaired 2 small wounds in the colon, then sutured the abdomen closed, leaving a bullet and internal bleeding in a kidney. Other medical doctors criticized Vidrine because he left a bullet in Long's kidney, and that is what killed him, the internal bleeding from leaving a bullet in Long's kidney. Later, his coat was found with 2 bullet holes in it, not just one. And the only one that had a gun at the scene was Long's own security guard. And the patsy, he ended up shooting 60 times. Or at least he had 60 bullets in him. According to historian Richard D. White, Jr., Vidrine, talented but inexperienced, sewed Huey Long up after the hour-long operation. But his patient deteriorated. Still bleeding internally, probably from a damaged kidney, Huey Long lapsed into and out of a coma. When the real surgeons finally arrived from New Orleans, they recognized that he needed another operation, but decided that he was too weak to undergo the trauma. 5 blood transfusions helped but little. Author Ed Reed, Louisiana political analyst, in preparing his 1986 book, Requiem for a Kingfish, The Strange and Unexpected Death of Huey Long. Reed conducted an interrogation of Merle Welsh, the funeral home director who served as mortician for Long. Welsh said one of the operating room doctors came to the funeral home late at night, reopened Long's sutures, and probed the corpse until he pulled out a bullet. Reed, the author, tracked down the funeral home assistant, who claimed to have that bullet on a keyring as a memento. This second bullet was left in Long's kidney until it killed him. Later, Long's coat turned up, and it had 2 bullet holes in it. There was a faked shooting and a framed patsy, which provided Long's own bodyguard, Murphy Rodin, a J. Edgar Hoover spy and a President Roosevelt's man on the spot, the opportunity to shoot Long twice, setting into motion the prearranged medical assassination. Spy Rodin accidentally shot Long twice? I don't know if I believe that. Would you? Rodin, the bodyguard, was also ordered to immediately kill the patsy, silencing him and concealing his innocent part in the assassination forever. This is the classic pattern. The deathbed confession stated it was no accident that over 60 bullets were pumped into the body of the patsy, whose name is Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, who was in fact not armed. There is an affidavit from Francis Grevenberg, the head of the Louisiana State Police, and this was made around the 1950s. It indicates that Grevenberg knew. It stated that the gun at the murder scene was actually a gun that was not there, that it was taken from Carl Weiss's, the patsy's, car, and then brought to the murder scene and left as evidence. So the patsy didn't even have a gun. Grevenberg said he was thwarted in his attempt to investigate. Some globalists higher up in the chain of command was able to stop his probe. This is a classic pattern again. In many ways, this is like the Kennedy assassination, where the master spy who Kennedy fired, Allen Dulles, and then Allen Dulles ends up on the investigation of the assassination on the Warren Commission. It's crazy. Dr. Rudolf Mattis, European Spanish Illuminati, in his capacity as a professor at Tulane University, had contact and supervision over Huey P. Long's alleged assassin, Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, and Dr. Carl Austin Weiss' future wife, Yvonne Pavey. Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, secret member of the Illuminati, was ordered to go to the Louisiana State Capitol on the night of September 8, 1935, and strike U.S. Senator Huey Long in the face with his, Dr. Carl Weiss's, fist. For the setup of the patsy, they needed a motive. Dr. Weiss's father-in-law, Judge Benjamin Pavey, was gerrymandered out of his public office by the state legislature under the supposed influence of Long's political supporters. My intuition tells me that Dr. Weiss was not a born killer. But under this extreme death threat pressure of a family member, even a child, he would have agreed to approach Long, if only to use his fist. Failure or refusal by Weiss to go to the Capitol building and strike Huey Long would have resulted in the sure death of his newborn child. Carl Weiss Jr., the son of the patsy, said of his father during a Baton Rouge symposium recently, "I don't think my father was a bad apple. I don't believe that he fired a fatal shot, or indeed he carried a gun into the state capitol that night. Of course, we have an affidavit that says the gun was retrieved from his trunk and planted." How other family members can be brought into such hideous actions. Huey Long's brother, George Shan Long, was a member of the Tulsa Lodge, number 425, and a 32nd degree Mason. He assured that no autopsy would take place. He also played a key role in dumping tons of concrete over Huey Long's coffin. This would make it almost impossible to exhume Huey Long's body at a later date. Globalists assassinate presidents and other influential people because they threaten their fascist communist police state and the attempt to take over the world and to rule the world, using the banking cartel and the monetary system, where they simply create money out of computer entries or have it printed up, and they spend a lot more money than the U.S. Congress because they're not audited. They just put the loans out through the banking system, and that creates money that they can spend. So the national debt is nothing but a fraud. Therefore, we must ask, did Huey Long endanger their power? The answer is fervently and vigorously, yes, he did. In his final months, Long followed up his earlier autobiography, Every Man a King, with a second book entitled My First Days in the White House, laying out his plans for the presidency in the election of 1936. Of course, he was killed and wasn't elected, but he wrote a book about it before he ran for office. Long was strongly supported in his plans to run for the presidency by Father Charles Edward Conklin, a truther, a Roman Catholic priest at Royal Oak, Michigan's National Shrine of the Little Flower Church. By 1934, Father Conklin was perhaps the most prominent Roman Catholic speaker on political and financial issues, with a radio audience that reached tens of millions of people every week. By 1934, he was receiving more than 10,000 letters every day, and his clerical staff at times numbered more than 100, which is great for a radio broadcast. Clearly, Long would have split the 1936 Democratic vote, dumping Roosevelt out of office and electing a Republican president. This would mean that the USA's entrance into World War II would have been delayed or never would have happened. 4 years later, in 1940, there was a good chance Long would have even been elected president. President Roosevelt considered Long a radical demagogue. The president privately said of Long that along with General Douglas MacArthur, he, Long, was one of the most dangerous men in America. Father Conklin, the Catholic priest, said that less care should be given to internationalism and more attention should be paid to national prosperity. Father Conklin's radio programs preached more and more about the negative influence of money changers and permitting a group of private citizens to create money at the expense of the general welfare of the public. He understood the monetary system. That's the way it works. We allow people to just create money. They don't work for it. They don't have a job. They just type it in their computer, and then they can loan it to somebody. But then somebody has to work to pay that loan back, and that's when it becomes more than just a computer entry. It becomes real money when you pay it back. According to Father Conklin, this is at the expense of the general public. And that's true. I agree. Father Conklin began denouncing Roosevelt as a tool of Wall Street. Conklin supported Huey Long until Long was assassinated in 1935. He claimed that Jewish bankers were behind the Russian Revolution, that Russian Bolshevikism was a disproportionately Jewish phenomenon, long before this fact became common knowledge in informed circles. Like Long, Father Conklin proposed monetary reforms, including the nationalization of the Federal Reserve System, as the solution. In July 1930, Father Conklin was given star billing as a witness before the House Committee to investigate communist activity. Huey Long worked as a traveling salesman, selling books, canned goods, and patent medicines, as well as working as an auctioneer. He attended seminary classes at Oklahoma Baptist University, but decided being a preacher was not for him. Huey Long had a photographic memory. In 1915, after studying law, he took the Louisiana State Bar exam. He passed and began private practice in Winfield, later in Shreveport also. He spent 10 years representing small plaintiffs against large businesses, including workers' compensation cases. He often said proudly that he never took a case against a poor man. Long won fame by taking on the powerful Standard Oil Company, which he sued for unfair business practices. Over the course of his career, Long continued to challenge Standard Oil's influence in state politics and charged the company with exploiting the state's vast oil and gas reserves. Long was a strong representative of the common man, and supporters dubbed him Kingfish, a name taken from the popular nationwide radio show Amos and Andy. It was both fun and funny. It was a comedy show, and Kingfish was a character in it. From one of my previous articles, we have discovered that before the Civil War, Rothschild agent Judah Benjamin first set up office in New Orleans. Therefore, long before Huey Long was elected governor of that state, political power in Louisiana had been nearly a monopoly of the coalition of bankers, businessmen, and planters, reinforced by the oil and other industry monopolies. This situation was changed when Governor Long won the hearts and votes of farmers and other small people, and created a countervailing power combination. Long depicted the elite wealthy as parasites who gobbled up more than their fair share of public wealth, and marginalizing the poor and marginalizing the middle class. Too much money in too few hands. Under Long's leadership, hospitals and educational institutions were expanded. A system of charity hospitals was set up that provided health care for the poor. Massive highway construction and free bridges brought an end to rural isolation. And free textbooks for school children were introduced to tackle illiteracy. Long knew this disaster that had caused nationwide suffering was intentionally produced by the Federal Reserve Bank. The privately owned Fed had reduced the volume of money in circulation by 1/3, causing the Great Depression. Then the banks gradually increased the money supply again. This would spur the economy, making Roosevelt look like a hero when actually his programs were centralizing power into a few hands and taking control away from the states and the people, which is the globalist agenda. This method deceived many people, and even today, many people call Roosevelt a hero when it was actually the Federal Reserve that caused the Depression and then pulled us out of it by increasing the money supply. Long was a staunch opponent of the Federal Reserve Bank. Together with a group of congressmen and senators, Long knew the Federal Reserve policies to be the true cause of the Great Depression. Long made speeches denouncing the large banking houses of Morgan and Rockefeller, centered in New York, which owned stock in the Federal Reserve System. Long believed that they manipulated the monetary system for their own benefit, for the banking elite, for the wealthy's benefit, and not for the benefit of the nation or not for the benefit of the public. That was Long's belief, and he was right. Which is exactly what President Andrew Jackson stated many years before. Long argued there was enough wealth in the country for every individual to enjoy a comfortable standard of living, but that it was unfairly concentrated in the hands of a few elite millionaire bankers, businessmen, and industrialists. This is also true today. Long, a Democrat, supported Roosevelt at first, then split with him in June 1933 to plan his own presidential bid for 1936, in alliance with radio's influential Catholic priest, Father Charles Conklin. To stimulate the economy, Long advocated federal spending on public works, on schools and colleges, and old age pensions. He was an ardent critic of the Federal Reserve System and its policies. Long was best known for his Share the Wealth program created in 1934 under the motto, "Every Man a King." It proposed new wealth redistribution measures in the form of a net asset tax on corporations and individuals to curb the poverty and the nationwide homeless epidemic during the Great Depression. Kingfish Long commanded large networks of supporters and was willing to take forceful action. He was assassinated because of the nature of his work. It is a contention of this series of articles is when the president or other influential people try to represent the interests of the nation and the interests of the people, that they then oppose the globalist agenda, the agenda of the elite, agenda of the power elite. It is for this reason that presidents and others are assassinated, because the power would change away from the small number of European bankers into the general public. That's what the problem that the world needs to solve, because these bankers are totally ruthless, they're Luciferian, and they will kill, mass murder, and kill millions of people to hold on to their power. And their bloodline is the same bloodline of Count Dracula in the movies, but the real Count Dracula, Von Dracula, known as the Impaler, because he would place as many as 20,000 bodies on stakes. Their bodies impaled on these stakes. That's how they hold power. That's how they care about having their power and their wealth. They will kill millions. It means nothing to them. They have no conscience about it. It's what they do. It's the way they're made. It's the way their bloodline is. That's why they create this bloodline. This is why they marry their cousins. The reason why they marry their cousins is because they want to perpetuate the bloodline that's willing to murder to hold this power, to murder millions, to hold this power and this wealth. There is here a classic pattern and a repeating method. There exists a direct conflict between the New World Order, a communist fascist police state, a world ruled by a tiny European elite, very few people, and it is opposed to the government of the people, for the people, and by the people, and their representative form of government. It is opposed to equality, and it is opposed to freedom. In writing this series, I have become amazed how the official accounts crumble and become so limp after careful review. The words applied to Long's official account by author Ed Reed applies to each and every assassination official story I have investigated. So the author Ed Reed concluded that the official story in the Long assassination, and I think it could apply to almost every one of these videos that I've made about the official stories about the assassination of presidents and others, that it should be relegated to the graveyard of hoaxes, of frauds, and of fairy tales.